You know, usually when we talk about the absolute limit of the human lifespan, there's this underlying assumption of biological finality.
Right, yeah, like it's just gravity.
Exactly, like it feels like an unbreakable law of nature. You're born, your cells slowly degrade over, 7 or 8 decades, and the clock eventually just runs out. We treat aging as a given.
Yeah, a hard stop permanently written into our DNA. I mean, it's literally the framework for everything we do in society.
But what if, and this is a big what if that 70 to 90-year limit isn't a biological law at all? What if it is simply an environmental engineering problem?
It's just such a wild reframing.
It really is. And welcome to the deep dive, by the way. Today, for everyone listening, we are looking at a stack of sources that don't just challenge our concept of aging, they completely obliterate it.
They really do. And we're unpacking two incredibly provocative texts from December 2025.
Yeah, authored by Fuchi Wu and co-authored by Vicor AC.
And these aren't just philosophical musings, which is what makes this so fascinating. It's this bizarre but brilliant combination of highly technical engineering and sweeping sociological theory.
Right, we're looking at a mechanical blueprint and a societal blueprint side by side. So the first document is a U.S. patent, specifically U.S. Patent 8268058B2, and it details a machine called the Air 80 Maze Purifier.
Yeah, a very specific piece of tech.
And then the second is a text called Master's Insight number 352, which is titled Sociology of Non-Newton Humans. And the core premise linking these two is just staggering.
It's massive.
It is. This single piece of technology claims to unlock a 300-year human lifespan. And, in doing so, it requires us to completely rewrite human civilization.
Because, the blueprint lays out how every single institution we rely on, I mean, education, marriage, economics, government, it all fundamentally shatters and has to be reconstructed when that biological clock stops ticking.
So our mission for this deep dive is twofold. First, we need to try and understand this radical machine that claims to give us a 3-century lifespan. And second, we're going to explore the absolute domino effect this has on our psychology and our society.
It's a huge ripple effect.
Right. But, okay, let's unpack this from the start. We are looking at a patent for an air purifier that claims to rewrite human civilization. I mean, that is quite the leap from the standard HEPA filter I have sitting in the corner of my living room, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It sounds completely absurd at first glance, but the sources posit a radically different view of human biology.
Okay, how so?
Well, the text argues that our current 70 to 90-year lifespans are actually an artificially shortened, highly corrupted state.
So we're not supposed to die at 80.
Right. The premise is that we aren't naturally dying of old age. We are succumbing to constant, relentless environmental poisoning. Like every single breath we take is slowly degrading our biological system.
Wow, so we've basically built an entire civilization around the assumption of being poisoned.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to understand how society changes, we really have to look at the catalyst first. How does one machine claim to achieve a, what they call a toxin-zero environment?
Yeah, the text outlines this 5-stage purification process designed specifically to stop humans from acting as, and this phrase really stuck with me, human air purifiers.
Ugh, yeah, it's such a visceral image, isn't it?
It really is.
The idea that right now, as you listen to this, your own lungs are basically functioning as the final filtration system for atmospheric toxins.
That is deeply unsettling to think about.
Right. But the Air 80 system is designed to take over that burden to achieve what the text calls the 8 zeros.
The 8 zeros, right.
Yeah, it promises air that is completely dust-free, germ-free, toxin-free, smoke-free, odor-free, heavy metal-free, microplastic-free, and aerosol-free.
Okay, but how? Because the real magic, like the absolute core of the patent, seems to happen in stages 3 and 4, in what they call the electrostatic collection labyrinth, or the tox box.
Tox box, yeah.
I was trying to visualize this from the schematics, and it feels like a microscopic, high-speed pinball machine. Like the air is the ball, and it's being whipped through more than 60 incredibly sharp turns and perforations.
Well, the geometry of that maze is very deliberate, because the walls of this labyrinth are electrostatically charged. So the negatively charged harmful particles and aerosols are slamming into these positively charged walls.
So they can't avoid hitting the sides.
Exactly. They literally cannot navigate those 60 turns without colliding with the walls.
But it's not just catching dust like a normal filter, right? Like, it's not just a physical net catching dirt.
No, far from it. The system integrates electrochemical oxidation. When an aerosol hits that charged plate, it acts almost like microscopic electroplating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it instantly initiates a molecular-level decomposition reaction.
Wait, so it's vaporizing them on contact?
Theoretically, yes. It oxidizes these organic toxins directly into carbon dioxide and water.
That's incredible.
Right, so instead of a filter that just gets clogged over time and needs replacing, you have a self-purifying filtration layer that's capable of autonomous regeneration.
So it cleans itself while it cleans the air?
Yes, every microsecond, billions of ultrafine particles are neutralized, resulting in an output the text dramatically calls super heaven air quality.
Super heaven air. I mean, it's a bold brand name, I'll give them that.
Very bold.
But, okay, here's where I have to push back a little on the author's logic. Even if my living room is an absolute zero toxin environment, even if I'm breathing super heaven air, does simply removing airborne toxins actually freeze the aging process?
It's the biggest question.
Right. Or does it just prevent early death from things like respiratory disease? Because 300 years is a massive claim just for breathing clean air.
Well, this raises an important point about the underlying biological philosophy here.
Yeah.
According to Fuqi Wu's text, aging as we know it is a cumulative symptom of this constant toxic load.
So aging is the symptom, not the disease.
Exactly. By breaking the disease chain at the environmental level, you are removing what the text calls the biological shackles.
The biological shackles?
Yeah, think of our current bodies like a car engine running on dirty, gritty oil.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right, so it runs, but the friction slowly tears the engine apart over time until it finally just seizes.
And the Air 80 purifier is essentially swapping that out for perfectly clean oil, so the engine runs with zero friction indefinitely.
Precisely. If the human body isn't constantly exhausting its cellular energy on fighting off microplastics and heavy metals and aerosols, it naturally shifts into a long-term steady state.
So without that constant microscopic battle, the body just sustains itself.
Yeah, the blueprint claims 300 years is actually the uncorrupted original design of human biology.
Okay, so if this machine actually works and the engine runs indefinitely, the entire timeline of human existence stretches out. Which pulls us into the second document, Master's Insight number 352.
This is where society gets rewritten.
Totally. The text explicitly states that humanity will transition from an aging society to an evergreen society.
And because the biological pacing is stretched out so far, being 70 years old completely loses its modern context.
Right.
In this new civilization, a 70-year-old has the biological equivalent and the energy of a modern 25-year-old.
Which is just wild. 70 is the new 25. So the author breaks this new 300-year life into 4 distinct phases, right?
Yeah, so 4 phases.
So from age 0 to 60, you have the development phase, which is basically an elongated childhood and adolescence. Then from 60 to 150, you hit your golden peak.
And then 150 to 220 is the creation or master phase.
Right. And finally, 220 to 300 is the wisdom phase, acting as the stabilizing force of civilization.
When you stretch the timeline like that, I mean, the institutions built for a 70-year sprint simply shatter. They can't hold up.
Oh, I'm guessing the first thing to collapse under its own weight is the school system. Because the 12-year mandatory education we have now is built entirely on the rush to get people into the workforce by age 18.
Yeah, that entire structure vanishes. In a 300-year lifespan, human plasticity is extended 3 to 4 times. The text replaces the 12-year system with a 60-year foundational life education.
60 years of school? I mean, I can't even imagine.
I know, but it's not just sitting in a classroom doing algebra for 6 decades.
I hope not.
No, it's a multi-axis education. The text outlines how you might master your first profession between 20 and 30, and then pick up an entirely second profession between 40 and 50, and then make a natural, mature selection of your life's work after age 60.
So the era of 18 decides your life is just over.
Completely over. It becomes reconfigure your life every 50 years. And because of this extended capability, the concept of retirement is entirely abolished.
Okay, hold on. I can hear the collective groan of anyone listening right now who is currently exhausted by the 9-to-5 grind.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because the idea of retirement sounds like an absolute nightmare. Are we supposed to just sit in a cubicle or work on a spreadsheet for 2.5 centuries?
That is definitely the immediate visceral reaction from a modern perspective. But we have to remember the physical premise here. The body isn't aging the same way.
Okay, fair.
The text argues that work fatigue as we experience it is largely a byproduct of physical decline. If you don't age, you don't exhaust in the same way.
That makes sense. Looking at the education model, I actually started thinking about it like a massive open-world video game.
How so?
Well, right now in our society, you basically pick your character's class at age 18. You know, you're a doctor, an accountant, a plumber, and you're pretty much locked in. But in this new model, you can completely respect your character's skills at level 50 and then again at level 100.
That's a great way to look at it. The 60 to 150 age bracket becomes this golden peak where individuals can accumulate 120 years of professional depth without losing their edge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, imagine a scientist or an artist who's been refining their craft for a century, but they still possess the physical energy of a 30-year-old. The innovation curve of civilization would just skyrocket.
Here's where the math of daily life gets really complicated, though. If you have this massive extension of the individual timeline, you completely break the traditional structures of human intimacy. I mean, how on earth do you stay married to the same person for 250 years?
Well, the author is very blunt about this. You probably don't.
Yeah, I figured.
The text claims that traditional lifelong marriage is essentially an institution designed to fit a 70-year lifespan. Yeah. It simply cannot sustain itself over 3 centuries. So a new 3-stage family model organically emerges to replace it.
Okay, so they break it down by age again. Stage 1 is the youth family, from ages 0 to 80. You're physically young, and this is when you raise your first generation of kids.
Right.
Then comes the mature family from 80 to 160. And the text notes this is a time of recombining values, where changing partners is an expected part of life.
Exactly.
And finally, you have the wisdom family from 160 to 300, which is less about biological reproduction and more about functional societal families, adoption, and mentorship.
And the psychological mechanics of that mature family phase are really crucial to understand. A 150-year-old brain has accumulated so much experience, so many paradigm shifts, that the values that bonded 2 people at age 30 are almost guaranteed to diverge.
People just grow apart.
Yeah, so recombining partners isn't viewed as a failure of the marriage. It's seen as a natural feature of a multi-century intimacy arc.
That's fascinating. But this leads to the most obvious logical concern for me. If birth rates stay the same, but literally no one is leaving the planet until they hit 300, aren't we going to be standing shoulder to shoulder? Won't this trigger catastrophic overpopulation?
It's the first question any sociologist would ask, naturally.
Right.
But the text argues the exact opposite will happen. It predicts the emergence of a steady-state civilization.
Steady state, okay.
The theory is that when survival pressure drops, birth rates naturally plummet. People simply aren't in a rush to reproduce. The timeline for having children is stretched out over decades, and that social panic of running out of time just disappears.
Wow. You know, there was one quote from Fuchiwu that absolutely stopped me in my tracks regarding how people view children in this society. The author says, "They are my Taoist friends."
Yeah, it's a profound shift in perspective.
It's wild to think about viewing a toddler not as, like, your biological property or your legacy, but as a spiritual peer who is just starting a multi-century journey right alongside you. You're basically raising a fellow traveler.
It completely changes the power dynamic of parenting.
But, and I have to push back on this utopian vision of a 300-year life, if I'm guaranteed 3 centuries of perfect health, why would I ever get in a car or fly in an airplane or do an extreme sport?
The risk factor.
Right. Doesn't a multi-century lifespan make humanity completely paralyzed by caution? The risk aversion would be astronomical.
That is a brilliant point, and it actually cuts to the heart of what the text calls the shift from a deaf-ear civilization to a deathless feeling civilization.
A deathless feeling civilization.
Yes. You might assume people become terrified of accidents, but the author argues that chronic anxiety is actually tied to the shortness of life.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when you remove the ticking clock of natural decay, humanity experiences higher patience and a much lower baseline anxiety. You aren't rushing, so you aren't making reckless, short-term survival decisions.
Okay, so you have a steady-state population of patient, multi-century citizens who are constantly reinventing themselves. But, and here's where politics comes in, you can't have a constantly evolving 300-year population living under rules written by politicians who think in 4-year election cycles.
No, absolutely not. The math of government completely breaks down.
Right.
And this is where the sociological blueprint scales up to the national level. The text insists that a 300-year civilization simply cannot be governed by 40-something politicians.
It just doesn't work.
The entire nature of short-term politics, the election cycles, the reactionary policies, it all vanishes. Instead, the world will naturally be governed by people in the 100 to 160 age bracket.
The 150-year-old leaders. The text says they are uniquely qualified because they possess cross-century experience and low emotional risk.
Right, they aren't reactive.
Exactly. I was thinking about this, and it's like comparing our current political system to a bunch of college students cramming the night before a final exam. Everything is reactive. Everything is a short-term panic to secure the next vote.
Oh, perfectly said.
But a 150-year-old leader who has lived through a century and a half of societal shifts and still has another century to go is like a grandmaster playing a 100-year chess game. They have to live with the consequences of their actions for lifetimes.
It naturally mitigates the short-termism that plagues modern governance.
But does having 150-year-old leaders actually guarantee profound wisdom, or does it just create the most deeply entrenched, unmovable bureaucracy imaginable, like a gerontocracy where new ideas are just suffocated by centuries of tradition?
The fear of a gerontocracy is very real. But the text reminds us of the core technological premise. Because the Air 80 purifier halts neurological decay, these 150-year-old leaders retain absolute mental plasticity.
Wait, so their brains are still as adaptable as a young person's?
Yes, they aren't aging politicians clinging to old ideas with degrading cognitive function. They are hyper-experienced individuals with the cognitive flexibility of youth.
That is a terrifyingly competent politician.
It really is. And this stability, combined with the technology, leads to the most shocking economic claim in the entire text.
Right, the natural surplus.
Yeah, the sudden appearance of a massive natural surplus in national budgets. We really have to consider the sheer scale of the medical industry today.
It's massive.
The text calls it the black hole of modern national budgets. Trillions of dollars poured into managing chronic decline. But because this air purifier cuts the disease chain entirely, hospitals just empty out. Medical costs simply evaporate.
Wow.
The author claims that 80% of the state's financial burden vanishes almost overnight.
80%. I mean, imagine what a society does when 80% of its national budget is suddenly freed up. If the state is no longer paying to manage a collapsing population, where does that money go? Does it fund universal basic income? Does it fund massive space exploration?
It creates what is termed the long-life economy. The resources previously dedicated to fighting disease and managing end-of-life care are redirected.
Into what?
Into infrastructure, arts, and those massive educational systems required for a 60-year school cycle. When you realize that, you see, the Air 80 isn't just an appliance.
It's way more than that.
It's a national financial and governance revolution disguised as an air filter.
Okay, let's zoom out and look at the big picture here, because we are looking at a civilization completely redefined by a single technological leap. We started this deep dive looking at a patent for an air purifier, forcing microscopic particles through 60 sharp turns to vaporize toxins. And from that single mechanical action, we ended up with a society where you change your career at 60, you restructure your marriage at 80, you govern nations at 150, and you treat your children as multi-century Taoist friends.
It really is a complete rewrite. And this brings us to the profound core belief of Fuqi Wu that permeates both of these sources. The goal here isn't simply about extending life. It's about reconstructing humanity.
Getting back to the blueprint.
Exactly. It's about returning the human form to its most stable, uncorrupted, original design, free from the toxic load that has forced us into these panicked short-term societal structures.
So every stress, every deadline, every societal pressure we feel today is, according to this text, just a symptom of our poisoned, shortened timeline.
Yeah, it forces you to look at your own life and wonder how many of your decisions are driven by genuine desire and how many are merely reactions to the fear of that ticking clock.
Wow. And that leaves us with a lingering thought for you to take away from this deep dive. We've talked extensively about how the mechanics of society, economics, marriage, education, government, how all of that would change when the biological clock stops ticking.
The logistics of a 300-year life.
Right. But think for a moment about human ambition. From building the pyramids, to writing a symphony, to starting a business, so much of human drive throughout history has been fueled by the panic of leaving a legacy before our time runs out. That fear of being forgotten.
The urgency of mortality.
Exactly. If you had 300 guaranteed years of perfect health, would you still be driven to achieve greatness today, or would you simply look at your ambitions and say, well, I'll get to it next century?
Quite the question.
It is. Keep questioning the blueprints of the world around you. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Air 8 Free Maze Purifier. The world's first single-pass purifier. Combining ionization, electrostatics, and airflow maze. The machine replaces humans. To absorb and destroy every toxin, air enters the ion zone. Viruses and dust gain negative charge. They pass electrostatic filters. Then enter the toxbox maze. Aerosols dry on electrode walls. breaking down into CO2 and water. Inside the maze, air twists and strikes over 60 times. Each turn ends a toxin's life. Billions of particles in 0.1 second are fully purified. It releases Earth's purest air. The superheaven air quality. 8-free, dust-free, germ-free, toxin-free. Smoke-free, odor-free, heavy metal-free. Microplastic-free, aerosol-free. Not just an air machine. The only key to lifespan freedom. U.S. Patent No. 8268058B2.